The great celebration hall on Centauri Prime sparkled with the light of 1,000 stars. Representatives from 23 different species had gathered for the most important event in galactic history, the 200th anniversary of the Galactic Cooperative. Council Elena Rodriguez stood near the back of the hall, watching the ceremony with careful eyes. As Earth's chief ambassador, she had attended many such events over her 30 years of service. But tonight felt different. Tonight she could sense something wrong in the air. The Zephyrian delegate was speaking now, his blue skin shimmering as he praised the council's achievements. His voice carried across the hall like music, but Elena understood the hidden meanings in his words. When he spoke of diverse contributions, he meant some species were more valuable than others. When he mentioned natural hierarchies, he was talking about humans. Elena had learned to speak 17 alien languages during her career. Most aliens thought humans were too simple to understand their subtle insults. They were wrong. The humans have served us well, the Zephyrian continued. With their refreshing simplicity and emotional honesty, they remind us that even the most basic minds can contribute to our great work. A few delegates made sounds that passed for laughter among their species. Elena kept her face calm, but inside, she felt the familiar sting of casual dismissal. She looked around the hall at her fellow humans. Dr. James Park sat with the science delegation, the man who had personally designed the quantum communication arrays that allowed instant messages across the galaxy. Next to him was Maria Santos, who had solved the food distribution crisis on 17 different worlds. Behind them sat dozens of other humans who kept the galaxy running. None of the alien delegates seemed to notice them. The ceremony continued for hours. Species after species stood to speak about cooperation and unity. The crystalline lattice minds talked about logic and efficiency. The gas-dwelling nebulans discussed the beauty of diversity. The insect-like Cathari praised the strength that came from working together. But when the time came for practical matters, it was always the humans who did the work. Elena remembered her first day on Centauri Prime 30 years ago. She had been young and excited to represent Earth in the galaxy's greatest alliance. The senior ambassador had given her simple advice. Watch everything, say little, and always be helpful. The other species see us as junior partners. Prove them wrong through actions, not words. She had followed that advice faithfully. Humans had followed it across the galaxy. When the Andromedan Collective and the Spiral Arm Federation had nearly gone to war over mining rights, it was human diplomats who found the compromise. When a plague threatened to wipe out the vegan colonies, human doctors worked for months to find a cure. When the trade networks became too complex for any one species to manage, human coordinators made them work. Humans had become the glue that held the galaxy together. But glue, Elena realized, was invisible until it failed. The celebration was ending, but Elena knew the real business would happen later. Important decisions were always made in private meetings, away from the ceremony halls. She was not invited to those meetings. 3 days after the celebration, the council called a special session. Elena sat in the human delegation area, reading through the proposed Resolution 2847. The title was innocent enough: Optimization of Galactic Resources. But Elena had learned to read between the lines of council documents. This resolution was about humans. Given the emotional volatility and limited cognitive frameworks observed in humanity, the document began, the council recognizes the need to restructure their participation for maximum efficiency. Elena's hands tightened on the data pad. She kept reading. The resolution would reclassify humans from full council members to valued service providers. They would keep their current jobs but lose their voting rights. The document explained this was for their own good. Humans were too emotional to make important decisions, but they were excellent at following orders. Elena looked around at her fellow human delegates. Dr. Park was reading the same document, his face growing pale. Maria Santos had stopped reading entirely and was staring at the ceiling. The debate began immediately. The Zephyrian delegate stood first. This resolution recognizes reality, he said. Humans have proven themselves capable workers, but their emotional nature makes them unsuitable for leadership roles. We have seen this in countless situations where human feelings have clouded their judgment. The lattice mind representative agreed. Human cognitive patterns lack the necessary complexity for strategic thinking. They operate on intuition rather than logic, This makes them valuable for certain tasks, but dangerous in decision-making positions. One by one, the other species voiced their support. They spoke kindly about humans, praising their work ethic and dedication. But the message was clear. Humans were useful servants, not true partners. Elena requested permission to speak. She stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the chamber. "Council members," she began, "I understand your concerns about human capabilities. I know we seem emotional and simple compared to your species, but I ask you to consider something. In the past 10 years, humans have prevented 3 wars, solved 5 major health crises, and kept the trade networks running through 2 economic collapses. We may think differently than you, but our results speak for themselves." The Kithari delegate made a clicking sound that Elena recognized as dismissive laughter. "Ambassador Rodriguez," he said, "your species' contributions are valued. No one questions human usefulness. But usefulness is not the same as leadership ability. You may fix problems, but you cannot see the bigger picture. This resolution simply acknowledges that reality." Elena sat down. She had expected this response, but it still hurt to hear it spoken so clearly. The vote was called. Elena watched as species after species voted in favor of the resolution. The Zephyrians voted yes. The Lattice Minds voted yes. The Nebulans, the Kithari, the Andromedans, all voted yes. When the voting was complete, the result was 22 in favor, 0 against, and 1 abstention. Elena realized with shock that humanity hadn't even been allowed to vote. Their status as service providers had already begun. She gathered her papers and walked out of the chamber without a word. Behind her, she could hear the delegates discussing implementation timelines and transition procedures. They were already moving on to other business. Elena went straight to the human embassy and called an emergency meeting. Within an hour, every human on Centauri Prime was gathered in the conference room. Scientists, diplomats, engineers, teachers, doctors, they all came. "We need to contact Earth immediately," Elena said. "Something is going to happen and we need to be ready." Dr. Park nodded grimly. "I'll send a priority message through the quantum array." "But Elena, what exactly are we getting ready for?" Elena looked around the room at these people who had spent their lives serving the galaxy. They were good people, skilled people, essential people. But the galaxy had just told them they weren't good enough to have a voice in their own fate. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I think our time here is ending." Outside the embassy windows, Centauri Prime's 3 suns were setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. Elena watched the light fade and wondered if she was seeing the end of more than just a day. The message to Earth went out that night, carrying news that would change everything. But Elena didn't know that yet. All she knew was that something fundamental had broken, and it could never be fixed. The galaxy had made its choice. Soon humanity would make theirs. Elena's ship dropped out of hyperspace near Earth 3 weeks after the vote. She had expected to find panic when she delivered the news. Instead, she found something much more surprising: preparation. The shuttle ride down to Earth's capital showed her things she had never seen before. Construction sites dotted the landscape, but not the kind she expected. These were shipyards, massive ones hidden in valleys and built underground. Hundreds of vessels were taking shape, from small exploration ships to enormous colony transports. At the spaceport, Elena was met by Dr. Sarah Chen, the head of Earth's colonial administration. Sarah was older than Elena, with gray hair and tired eyes, but she moved with the energy of someone half her age. "Welcome home, Ambassador," Sarah said as they walked through the terminal. "I'm sorry about what happened at the council." "You already know?" Elena asked. "We've been monitoring the situation for years," Sarah replied. "We hoped things would improve, but we prepared for this possibility." They took a private transport to the Colonial Administration headquarters, a building Elena had visited many times but never really noticed. Now she saw it with new eyes. The parking areas were full of vehicles. People moved with urgent purpose through the corridors. This was not a sleepy government office. It was a command center. Sarah led Elena to a conference room where a dozen people were waiting. Elena recognized some of them: Dr. Lisa Wong from the Terraforming Project, Admiral Marcus Thompson from the Exploration Fleet, Dr. James Kim from the Technology Research Division. Others were strangers, but they all had the same look: focused, determined, and completely calm. "Elena," Sarah said, "meet the team that's going to move humanity to the stars." Elena sat down slowly. Move humanity? What are you talking about? Dr. Wong leaned forward. We're talking about a complete evacuation of all humans from council space. Every scientist, every engineer, every diplomat, every family. We're going home. But our work, Elena protested. The projects we're running, the relationships we've built. We can't just abandon everything. Admiral Thompson spoke up. We're not abandoning anything. We're conducting the most organized withdrawal in galactic history. Every human will complete their current assignments. Every project will be properly handed over. Every system will be left in perfect working order. Elena looked around the room. These people were serious. How long have you been planning this? 50 years, Sarah said quietly. Ever since we joined the council, we've maintained contingency plans. We hoped we'd never need them, but we're not the type of species to be caught unprepared. Dr. Kim activated a holographic display that filled the center of the room. It showed a three-dimensional map of local space with hundreds of star systems marked in different colors. Blue systems are council members, he explained. Red systems are unexplored. Green systems are where we've been quietly establishing colonies for the past 30 years. Elena stared at the display. There were dozens of green dots scattered across the map far from council space. 30 years? She whispered. We started small, Dr. Wong said. Survey missions, research stations, mining operations. All perfectly legal under council exploration treaties. But each mission left behind infrastructure, supplies, and a few permanent residents. Over time, those small outposts became towns, then cities, then self-sufficient colonies. Sarah touched a control, and the display zoomed in on one sector. This is the new Terra system. Population 4 million. They have their own farms, factories, universities, and shipyards. They've been building the evacuation fleet for the past 10 years. Elena felt dizzy.
4 million people?
How did the council not know? Because we never told them, Admiral Thompson said. The council saw human exploration as harmless curiosity. They never imagined we were building an alternative civilization. The display showed more systems. New Geneva, with its massive research facilities. New Beijing, specializing in manufacturing. New Lagos, focused on agriculture. New Moscow, developing advanced technologies the council had never seen. How many people are we talking about? Elena asked. In council space? About 12 million humans across 300 systems, Sarah said. In our colonies? 8 million and growing fast. By the time the evacuation is complete, we'll have more people in human space than we ever had working for the council. Elena was trying to process all of this when Dr. Kim spoke again. The evacuation begins tomorrow. Tomorrow? Elena stood up. That's impossible. You can't move 12 million people overnight. We're not moving them overnight, Sarah said calmly. We're moving them over the next 6 months in carefully planned stages. It will look like routine personnel rotations and research expeditions until the very end. Admiral Thompson activated another display. We've divided the evacuation into phases. Essential personnel first. The people maintaining critical systems. They'll train their replacements before leaving, then specialist families, and finally the diplomatic staff. Elena looked at the timeline. It was incredibly detailed, accounting for everything from food supplies to communication schedules. What about our responsibilities? She asked. The projects we're running, the systems we maintain? Dr. Wong smiled. We're going to do exactly what we've always done. Our jobs. Every human will complete their current assignments. Every project will be properly documented and handed over. Every system will have trained operators before we leave. We're not running away, Sarah added. We're conducting an orderly transition. The council will get exactly what they asked for. Human services without human decision-making. Elena sat back down. And after? What happens to Earth's relationship with the council? The room was quiet for a moment. Then Sarah spoke carefully. Earth will withdraw from the council. We'll maintain trade relationships with individual species, but on our own terms. The age of humans as junior partners is over. Elena thought about all the human scientists she knew, working on projects across the galaxy. What about Dr. Martinez on Kepler 442b? She's been studying the ecosystem there for 15 years. She'll complete her research and train the Zephyrian team to continue it, Dr. Wong said. Her work won't be lost, it will be perfectly preserved and documented. And Captain Wilson's trading routes through the Vega system? He'll train his replacement and provide complete operational manuals. Admiral Thompson said. The roots will continue to function. Elena realized they had thought of everything. The other species, they have no idea this is coming. None, Sarah confirmed. They see us as simple, emotional, and predictable. They expect us to complain, maybe protest, but ultimately accept our new status. They cannot imagine that we would simply leave. Dr. Kim leaned forward. Elena, you've spent 30 years representing humanity in council space. You know these species better than almost anyone. What do you think will happen when we're gone? Elena thought about the systems she had seen humans maintain, the problems they had solved, the connections they had built. Everything will fall apart, she said quietly. Probably, Sarah agreed. But that's not our responsibility anymore. We offered partnership and they chose to see us as servants. Now they'll learn the difference. Elena looked around the room one more time. These people had spent decades preparing for this moment. They had built an entire parallel civilization while serving faithfully in council space. They had planned for every detail, considered every consequence. When do I leave? She asked. You're in the final phase, Sarah said. You'll stay until the very end, maintaining diplomatic relations and ensuring smooth transitions. You'll be one of the last humans to leave council space. Elena nodded slowly. It felt strange to be planning the end of everything she had worked for. But as she looked at the star maps showing humanity's new worlds, she felt something unexpected. Hope. One more question, she said. What do we call this operation? Sarah smiled. Operation Exodus. Elena looked out the window at Earth's blue sky. Soon, she would return to council space to begin the most complex evacuation in galactic history. But for the first time in years, she felt truly proud to be human. They weren't running away. They were going home to a home they had built for themselves, far from those who could never see them as equals. The revolution had begun, and it would be the quietest revolution in galactic history. Station Manager Kethavar arrived at his office on Vega Station at exactly 800 hours, Galactic Standard Time, just as he had every day for the past 12 years. His crystalline form reflected the morning light as he settled into his command chair and activated the daily status displays. Everything appeared normal. The massive orbital trading hub was processing its usual volume of cargo, thousands of ships arriving and departing, millions of tons of goods moving between the galaxy's civilized worlds. The displays showed green across all major systems, but something felt wrong. Kethavar's species, the lattice minds, experienced the world through pure logic and data analysis. They didn't have emotions in the human sense, but they had something similar, a deep pattern recognition that told them when things were out of place. The first anomaly appeared in the personnel reports. Maria Santos, the chief logistics coordinator, had not checked in. This was unusual, as Maria had perfect attendance for the past 8 years. Kethavar queried the residential database and found that Maria had departed on a transport the previous evening, bound for the Tau Ceti system on emergency family business. More queries revealed more absences. David Park from the engineering section was gone. Lisa Chen from the communications department had left 2 days ago. In fact, as Kethavar dug deeper into the data, he discovered that 47 humans had departed Vega Station in the past week. This was concerning, but not alarming. Humans were emotional creatures, and they often had family emergencies or personal issues that required travel. What concerned Kethavar was that none of them had requested leave in advance. He decided to contact the remaining human staff to understand what was happening. But when he tried to locate them, he made a discovery that sent cold. Calculation racing through his crystalline matrix, there were no remaining human staff. Every single human on Vega Station, all 1,047 of them, was gone. Kethavar immediately called an emergency staff meeting. Within an hour, representatives from all departments had gathered in the main conference room. The Zephyrians looked confused, their blue skin shifting to darker shades that indicated worry. The Nebulans floated nervously, their gas-form bodies rippling with anxiety. Even the usually calm Andromedans seemed disturbed. The situation is clear, Kethavar announced. All human personnel have departed the station. However, they appear to have left their workstations in order and provided detailed transition documents. Dr. Zixthara, the Zephyrian head of environmental systems, raised a delicate hand. That's impossible. Maria Santos was supposed to train me on the cargo routing algorithms this week. She wouldn't leave without completing the transfer. According to the records, Kethvar replied, she did complete it. There's a comprehensive training module in your system, along with detailed documentation of all procedures. Zixthera checked her workstation. Indeed, there was a complete training package waiting for her, more thorough than anything she had ever seen. But something about it felt final, like a goodbye letter. The meeting continued as each department head reported similar findings. The humans had left behind perfect documentation, complete project files, and detailed operational manuals. Everything was organized, labeled, and explained in simple terms, but they were gone. The first crisis emerged within hours. Vega Station processed 50,000 trade transactions per day, each requiring complex calculations to determine routing, pricing, and scheduling. The humans had handled these calculations with an intuitive understanding that seemed almost magical to the other species. Without them, the system began to slow down. By midday, transaction processing had dropped to 30,000 per day. By evening, it was down to 20,000. Ships were backing up in the approach vectors, waiting for clearance that was taking longer and longer to arrive. The problem wasn't that the non-human staff couldn't do the work. They could follow the procedures the humans had left behind, but they couldn't make it flow the way the humans had. They lacked the intuitive leaps, the creative solutions, and the emotional understanding of what traders really needed. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, similar discoveries were being made. On the research station orbiting Proxima Centauri, Dr. Veltar arrived at his laboratory to find that his entire human research team had vanished overnight. Dr. Sarah Martinez, his lead mathematician, had left behind her complete research files, but when Veltar tried to review her latest work on dark matter fluctuations, he found himself staring at equations he could read but not understand. The mathematics were correct. His computer verified every calculation. But the intuitive leaps that had led Sarah to her conclusions were missing. She had seen patterns in the data that his logical mind couldn't detect. On the diplomatic station at Alpha Centauri, Ambassador Wispflow of the Nebular Collective discovered that Elena Rodriguez had departed 2 days earlier. Elena had left behind detailed briefings on all current negotiations, but Wispflow quickly realized that managing galactic diplomacy was more than just following procedures. Within hours of Elena's departure, a minor trade dispute between the Cathari and the Andromedans escalated into threats of economic sanctions. When Wispflow tried to mediate using Elena's standard protocols, both sides became more angry. Somehow, Elena had always known exactly what to say to calm tensions. Wispflow had the same information, but not the understanding. The most devastating discovery came from the Galactic Communication Network. Headquarters, Dr. James Park and his team of human engineers had maintained the quantum entanglement arrays that allowed instant communication across the galaxy. They had left behind extensive technical manuals and step-by-step maintenance procedures, but quantum mechanics was as much art as science. The humans had developed an intuitive understanding of how the arrays behaved, making tiny adjustments based on subtle patterns that they could feel but not explain. The replacement engineering teams followed the procedures perfectly, but they couldn't sense when something was about to go wrong. On the third day after the human departure, the first communication array failed. Then another. Then a cascade of failures began spreading across the network. Within a week, instant galactic communication was reduced to a few functioning nodes. Most systems had to rely on traditional lightspeed transmissions, meaning messages took years to cross the galaxy. But perhaps the most telling moment came on the medical research vessel Harmony, orbiting the planet Kepler-4b. Dr. Marcus Webb had spent 40 years studying the planet's unique ecosystem alongside his Zephyrian colleague, Zixthera. Zixthera arrived at the laboratory expecting their usual morning briefing, only to find Marcus's workstation empty. There was a datapad waiting for her with a simple message. The complete research archive is in the main computer. The local fauna migration patterns are documented in files 1 through 847. Take care of them for me. As Zixthera read through Marcus's files, she realized something profound. She could understand every word, every observation, every conclusion, but she couldn't understand why Marcus had cared so deeply about creatures that were, logically speaking, just biological specimens. Marcus had seen the animals as individuals, had given them names, had worried about their well-being. This emotional connection had driven him to insights that pure scientific method could never have achieved. Now that connection was gone, and with it, something essential to the research. By the end of the first week, it was clear that something unprecedented had happened. Every human in council space had vanished simultaneously, leaving behind perfect documentation, but taking with them something intangible that had made galactic civilization work. The news spread through the failing communication networks like a slow-moving wave. On Centauri Prime, the council held emergency sessions trying to understand what had happened. Some delegates suggested that the humans had been kidnapped or killed by unknown enemies. Others theorized that it was some kind of coordinated protest. But Councilor Prime Zexhai of the Cathari Dominion, who had been most vocal about human limitations, began to suspect the truth. This wasn't a crisis or a protest. This was a choice. The humans had simply decided to leave. As he sat in his empty office, surrounded by the perfectly organized files that human assistants had left behind, Zexhai tried to contact Earth through the failing communication networks, but there was no response from the human homeworld. It was as if humanity had vanished from the galaxy entirely, leaving behind only the quiet echo of their absence. Outside his window, ships waited in long lines for clearance to dock at Centauri Prime spaceport. The traffic control systems, designed and maintained by humans, were backing up without their creator's touch. The galaxy was learning what it meant to function without humanity. The lesson was not going well. 6 months had passed since the day the humans disappeared, and Councilor Prime Zexhai stood in what had once been the galaxy's greatest library. The Great Archive of Kepler 438b had housed the collected knowledge of 23 civilizations, its vast halls filled with the wisdom of 10,000 years. Now it was dying. The problem wasn't dramatic. No fires, no explosions, no obvious destruction. Instead, it was the slow death of 1,000 small failures. The search algorithms that helped researchers find information had become unreliable. The cataloging system that organized new knowledge was breaking down. Most troubling of all, connections between different fields of study were being lost. Dr. Veltar walked beside Zexhai through the empty corridors, his footsteps echoing in the silence. "It's not that we can't operate the systems," he explained, his voice heavy with frustration. "We have all the technical documentation the humans left behind. We can input data, run searches, maintain the servers. But somehow it doesn't work the same way." They stopped at a research terminal where Dr. Felnara, a brilliant lattice mind scientist, was struggling with a simple search. She was looking for information about protein synthesis in carbon-based life forms. But the system kept returning irrelevant results about stellar formation and quantum mechanics. "The human archivists understood connections we never noticed," Felnara said without looking up. "They saw relationships between biology and physics, between art and science, between logic and emotion. Their search algorithms weren't just based on keywords, they were based on meaning." Zexhai watched as Felnara tried different search terms, each attempt bringing more frustration. Before the humans left, finding information in the Great Archive had been effortless. Now even the simplest research took hours. "How much knowledge have we lost access to?" Zexhai asked. "Technically, none," Veltar replied. "Every file is still here, every document perfectly preserved. But if we can't find what we need, does it matter that it exists?" They continued through the library, passing empty reading rooms and silent study areas. The archive had once buzzed with activity as researchers from across the galaxy came to access its resources. Now most scientists had given up and returned to their home worlds, relying on their own limited databases. The next stop on Zexhai's tour was the medicinal moon of Tau Ceti, accessible through a short hyperspace jump. The moon had been humanity's greatest gift to galactic civilization, a facility that produced healing compounds effective against diseases from all known species. The moon's administrator, Dr. Kixistar of the Andromedan Collective, met them at the landing pad. His normally calm demeanor was cracked with stress, and his usually pristine robes were stained with chemical residue. "Production is down 80%, he reported without preamble. "We can follow the synthesis procedures the humans left behind, but we keep making mistakes." They toured the production facilities, where automated systems churned out medicines in quantities far below their previous capacity. The problem, Dr. Kickstar explained, was in the subtle adjustments required for different species biology. Dr. Sarah Chen, the human biochemist who designed these processes, understood how the same compound affected different physiologies, he said. She could modify the synthesis on the fly, adjusting molecular structures based on which species would be using the medicine. We have her notes, but we don't have her intuition. The consequences were visible in the medical reports scrolling across the facility's displays. 3 species were experiencing shortages of critical medications. The vegan colonies were dealing with an outbreak of crystalline fever that should have been easily treatable. The gas-dwelling Nebulans were facing a respiratory disorder that was spreading through their population. People are dying, Dr. Kickstar said quietly, because we can't make the medicine work the way the humans did. ZXHI's next destination was the Cultural Exchange Center on Vega Prime, once the heart of interspecies understanding. The center had hosted programs that helped different civilizations learn about each other, preventing the misunderstandings that could escalate into conflicts. The center's current director, Dr. Mexhaller, was a Cathari anthropologist who had worked closely with human cultural specialists. She led ZXHI through exhibits that now stood empty and unused. The humans had a gift for translation that went beyond language, she explained. They could help us understand not just what other species said, but what they meant. They bridged the gaps between radically different ways of thinking. Without the human cultural anthropologists, old prejudices and conflicts were resurging across the galaxy. The Zephyrians and the Lattice Mines had suspended trade relations over a misunderstanding about contract terms. The Andromedans were threatening to withdraw from 3 joint research projects because they felt insulted by Cathari negotiating tactics. We're reverting to type, Dr. Mexhaller said sadly. Each species is retreating into its own way of thinking, and we're losing the ability to truly communicate with each other. The tour's final stop was Vega Station itself, where ZXHI had first learned about the human disappearance. Station manager Kethavar met them at the docking port, his crystalline form dimmed with exhaustion. We're processing 12,000 transactions per day, he reported. Before the humans left, we handled 50,000. Ships are backing up throughout the sector. Some traders have given up on transgalactic routes entirely. They walked through the station's corridors, past empty offices and abandoned workstations. The automated system still functioned, but they lacked the intuitive management that had made Vega Station the hub of galactic commerce. The humans saw patterns we couldn't detect, Kethavar explained. They could predict which routes would be busy, which traders needed priority handling, which cargo was time-sensitive. They managed the chaos through understanding, not just procedures. But the most serious crisis was still the communication breakdown. As their ship jumped from system to system, ZXHI experienced firsthand how the galaxy had been fragmented. Messages that once transmitted instantly now took days or weeks to arrive, when they arrived at all. The quantum entanglement arrays that had enabled galactic civilization were failing one by one. The replacement engineering teams could maintain the individual components, but they couldn't maintain the delicate balance that kept the entire network functioning. Entire sectors of the galaxy were becoming isolated, cut off from the rest of civilization by the vast distances between stars. Without instant communication, coordinating responses to crises became impossible. Trade negotiations that once took hours now took months. Scientific collaboration between distant worlds simply stopped. On Centauri Prime, the Council held increasingly desperate sessions trying to address the cascading failures. But the meetings themselves demonstrated the problem. Without human diplomats to facilitate understanding between species, the discussions devolved into confusion and mutual incomprehension. ZXHI attended one such session, watching as delegates argued past each other, unable to bridge the gaps in their thinking. The Zephyrians wanted to focus on emotional impacts of the crisis. The Lattice Minds insisted on pure logical analysis. The Nebulans spoke in metaphors that other species couldn't understand. The Cathari became frustrated with everyone else's inefficiency. What had once been productive debate became an exercise in futility. After the session, ZXHI found himself alone in the chamber where Resolution 2847 had been passed 6 months earlier. The vote that had reclassified humans as service providers now seemed like the action of children who had broken their most precious toy. He accessed the Council's databases and began reviewing reports from across the galaxy. The pattern was consistent everywhere. Systems that had worked smoothly for decades were falling apart without human oversight. Not because the humans had been irreplaceable, but because they had been integral. They hadn't just operated galactic civilization, they had been the connective tissue that held it together. 3. Star systems were on the verge of famine because agricultural distribution networks had collapsed. 2 species were close to war over territorial disputes that human diplomats could have resolved in hours. Scientific research was stagnating as collaboration between species became impossible. The most bitter irony was that several species had begun developing technologies to replace human capabilities. The lattice minds were building artificial intelligence systems to manage trade networks. The Zephyrians were training specialist diplomats to handle interspecies relations. The Andromedans were developing new medical synthesis procedures. All of these projects would take years to complete, and none would fully replace what the humans had provided. But more importantly, they represented an admission that the Council had been wrong about human limitations. As Zexhai sat in the empty chamber, he realized that the Galactic Cooperative Council was dying. Not from conquest or disaster, but from its own inability to function without the species it had dismissed as intellectually limited. 6 months ago, he had voted to reduce humanity's status because he believed they were inferior partners. Now he knew the truth. They hadn't been partners at all. They had been the foundation on which everything else was built, and foundations once removed were very hard to replace. 2 years after the humans disappeared, Counselor Prime Zexhai stood in the ruins of what had once been the galaxy's greatest trading hub. Vega Station drifted silent through space, its lights dimmed, its corridors empty. The massive orbital complex that had once processed millions of tons of cargo daily was now a tomb of broken dreams and failed ambitions. He was not alone. Representatives from 7 remaining council species had gathered for what everyone knew would be the final meeting of the Galactic Cooperative Council. Where once 23 species had worked together, now only a handful remained committed to the alliance that had defined galactic civilization for 2 centuries. The others had already given up. The Andromedan Collective had withdrawn 18 months ago, choosing to focus on their own stellar region, rather than try to maintain galactic connections through the failing communication networks. The Spiral Arm Federation had followed 6 months later. The gas-dwelling Nebulans had simply stopped responding to Council communications entirely. "The formal dissolution documents are ready for signature," announced Dr. Veltar, who now served as the Council's Secretary General in the absence of any willing candidates. His voice echoed strangely in the empty conference room where momentous decisions had once been. Maid Zexhai looked around at his fellow delegates. Dr. Zixthara represented the few remaining Zephyrian colonies that hadn't retreated into isolation. Dr. Kethvar had abandoned Vega Station but still spoke for the Lattice Mind Collective. A handful of others sat at the great circular table that had once seated 23 species. "Before we sign," Zexhai said, "I want to share something I discovered yesterday." He activated the conference room's holographic display, one of the few systems still functioning reliably. The image that appeared showed a detailed analysis of dark matter fluctuations in the Kepler 442b system. This research was completed by Dr. Sarah Martinez. 18 months before the humans left, he explained. "I found it buried in the archives Dr. Marcus Webb left behind. It's not just an analysis. It's a complete solution to the energy crisis that's been crippling our worlds." The other delegates leaned forward. The galaxy-wide energy shortage had forced several species to abandon outer colonies and consolidate their populations. Power generation had become a critical problem as traditional fuel sources became harder to transport through the broken trade networks. Dr. Martinez discovered a way to harness dark matter fluctuations for energy generation. Zexhai continued. "The calculations are elegant, the engineering requirements are within our capabilities, and the potential output is virtually unlimited." Dr. Zixthara's skin shifted to a pale blue, indicating deep thought. "When did she complete this research?" 14 months before Resolution 2847 was passed," Zexhai replied. "She solved our energy crisis more than 2 years ago. But she never shared it with the Council." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The humans had possessed the solution to one of the galaxy's greatest challenges, but they had chosen not to reveal it. "Why?" asked Dr. Kethvar. his crystalline form reflecting the hologram's light. Why would they withhold such important information? HFY switched the display to show Dr. Martinez's personal research notes. According to her files, she intended to present the findings at the 201st anniversary celebration. She had prepared a complete presentation for the Science Council, including implementation timelines and resource requirements. He paused, letting the significance register. The presentation was scheduled for 3 days after Resolution 2847 passed. Dr. Veltar's optical sensors dimmed. She never gave the presentation because we had just voted to strip humans of their decision-making authority. Exactly, HFY confirmed. Why would she share galaxy-changing technology with species who had just declared her intellectually inferior? As the delegates absorbed this revelation, HFY continued his discoveries. The human archives contained dozens of similar breakthroughs, cures for diseases that still plagued several species, solutions to the agricultural problems causing famines on the rim worlds, new manufacturing techniques that could have revolutionized industry. All of it developed during the final years of human participation in the Council. All of it withheld after Resolution 2847. They were still working to help us, Dr. Zixathera said quietly, even as we were preparing to demote them. And when we made it clear we didn't value their contributions, HFY replied, they stopped contributing. The irony was devastating. The Council had voted to limit human participation because they viewed humans as intellectually limited. In response, the humans had simply taken their intellect elsewhere. Dr. Veltar brought up the dissolution documents again. The question now is whether there's any point in continuing. The communication networks are down to 15% capacity. Inter-system trade has collapsed. 6 species have completely isolated themselves. Should we officially end the Council or let it die slowly? Before anyone could answer, the Chamber's communication system activated for the first time in months. A clear signal was coming through, stronger than any transmission they had received since the network failures began. This is Earth Control to Centauri Prime, came a voice that sent shockwaves through the assembled delegates. We are responding to your repeated communication attempts. Please prepare to receive an official transmission from the Human Colonial Alliance. The delegates looked at each other in amazement. Earth was responding. After 2 years of silence, humanity was finally answering their calls. Message received, Dr. Veltar replied. Transmitting. The holographic display changed to show a woman in a crisp blue uniform standing in what appeared to be a command center. Behind her, through large windows, could be seen a bustling city under an alien sky. I am Admiral Sarah Chen, speaking on behalf of the Human Colonial Alliance, the woman said. We have received multiple requests for communication from former Council species. We wish to make our position clear. HFY recognized the name, Dr. Sarah Chen, who had coordinated the human evacuation. But she was no longer a doctor. The rank insignia on her uniform indicated she now held one of the highest positions in human space. The Human Colonial Alliance consists of 147 worlds in 37 star systems. Chen continued. Our population has grown to 22 million citizens living in self-sufficient colonies beyond former Council space. We have developed independent technologies, established our own trade networks, and created a civilization based on principles of mutual respect and cooperation. The numbers were staggering. In just 2 years, humanity had built an interstellar empire, larger than many Council species had achieved in centuries. We bear no ill will toward the former Council species, Chen said. We understand that our departure caused difficulties and we regret any suffering that resulted. However, we cannot return to a relationship based on inequality and dismissal of our contributions. Dr. Zixathera leaned forward. Are they willing to rejoin the Council? Chen seemed to anticipate the question. The Human Colonial Alliance extends an offer of trade and cooperation to all former Council species. We propose new relationships based on recognition of each species' unique contributions and equal participation in decision-making. We have enclosed coordinates for our diplomatic stations and trade hubs. The transmission continued with specific details about human space, research facilities that were making breakthrough discoveries, manufacturing centers producing goods that former Council species needed, agricultural worlds capable of feeding billions. Most remarkably, the humans had solved the communication problem. Their new quantum entanglement networks covered all of human space and were being extended to neighboring systems. They were offering to share the technology with any species willing to establish formal diplomatic relations. We learned much during our time in Council Space, Chen concluded. We value the knowledge and friendship we gained from other species. But we will not accept subordinate status in exchange for participation. The choice of how to proceed rests with each individual species. The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Zexhai looked around at his fellow delegates. In 2 years, they had watched galactic civilization crumble without human participation. Meanwhile, humanity had built something new and apparently thriving in the unexplored regions of space. The irony is complete, he said finally. We declared them intellectually inferior, so they left and proved us wrong. We voted to make them service providers, so they built their own civilization where they don't need to serve anyone. Dr. Veltar brought up the dissolution documents one more time. Do we sign these and officially end the council? Yes, Zexhai said without hesitation. The Galactic Cooperative Council is dead. It died the day we decided that useful servants were more valuable than equal partners. One by one, the remaining delegates signed the documents that formally dissolved the alliance that had governed the galaxy for 2 centuries. As they prepared to leave the abandoned station, Dr. Zixthara asked the question they were all thinking. What now? Zexhai looked out at the stars, knowing that somewhere beyond the visible constellations, humanity was building a future they had chosen for themselves. Now we decide whether we want to be part of what comes next, he said.